AI is melting into everything. In fact, you might think that it's melting into our lives so much that it is now becoming part of our social infrastructure. At least, that's the claim that my guest today makes. Her name is Mona Sloane. She's an assistant professor of data science and media studies at the University of Virginia, and she's the author of the new book, Predicted: How AI is Restructuring Social Life. The point of the book is something like this. Mona thinks that prediction in our lives is occurring, number one, at a speed and scale that we've never seen before. So we've always had airlines making predictions about when people are going to buy tickets. We've had taxi dispatchers just predicting when people are going to call on taxis. But now we have predictions at a much faster speed and at a much greater scale. The other thing is that we are getting predictions in areas of life where we didn't previously have predictions. So Mona thinks that we see predictions happening now in our creative work, in our friendships, in our family life, so on and so forth. So not only are we increasing the quantity or the, if you like, the density of predictions where there already were predictions, we're now seeing predictions in totally new places. Now you might think, okay, yeah, so what? So there's more predictions. So what? We make predictions. We've always been making predictions. So now AI helps us make more predictions. Why is that such a bad thing? Or what's the upshot of all that? There are at least two kinds of things that Mona's focused on. The first is what she calls the prediction paradigm. The general idea is something like this. To the extent that you get more and more predictions about the future, or put slightly differently, more articulations about what the future is going to look like, you might think that's going to make people think, well, then what's the point of really trying to fight all that? What's the point of deliberating? I'm just fighting the windmills here. We already know what the future is going to be. So we're going to stop, or at least decrease, how much we deliberate and think for ourselves. We'll give ourselves over to the predictions of the AI, and taken at scale, you ultimately get something like the erosion of democracy as we think less and less about what our future ought to look like and how we're going to shape it ourselves. Another sort of thing that Mona focuses on is the consolidation of power. So if AI is social infrastructure, it does so much to shape our lives in so many different ways, and the AI models and the chips, the AI chips, are owned by such a small amount of society, then you have a tremendous consolidation of power, and bad things happen when very few people have lots and lots of power. Mona thinks that we need greater regulation. She thinks that we need regulation around pricing. She thinks that we need better public participation in how the technology continues to be developed. And she draws inspiration from the government partnership with Bell Labs and AT&T, where there's private ownership of the company, but the government engages in regulations around, or creating regulations around, stabilizing pricing in exchange for publicly beneficial research. I push back on all this in a number of ways, of course, although I think there's something quite plausible about the core of all this. One point that I push back on is I'm not totally sold on AI is infrastructure. My concern here, and I might not be right about this, but my sort of concern about thinking about it this way is that I think the influence of AI shows up in the, I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of particular applications in which AI is embedded, as opposed to just this monolithic thing called AI that's influencing us. So I'm not sure what to do with that thought. Mona thinks that I'm over-exaggerating or overemphasizing that. At any rate, you should listen and you should decide who's right, who's wrong. And I don't know, maybe it's me. Okay, so that's what our conversation is about. If you have any trenchant criticisms, comments, or suggestions, or whatever, you can email me at em@readblackman.com. And as I've said a million times before, I have a new book out, The Ethical Nightmare Challenge. You can find that on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and blah, 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 blah. And I don't know, that's it. If you also just want to listen to the book, I did a bunch of podcasts on it. You can just listen to me read it if you like. All right, let's go talk to Mona. Okay, so Mona, in your new book, which I want you to hold up to the camera so people can see it for those of you who are watching this, you argue that, hold it up already. There we go. Closer to the camera. Let's give the people a view. Beautiful. How AI, I'm going to read the title. Let me read the title. How AI is restructuring social life. Great. Oh, is it predicted? It's predicted.
It is predicted how AI is restructuring social life.
And your main contention, from what I gather, is that you think that AI should be regarded as social infrastructure. And I want to know, what does that mean? And why is it important that we regard it as such?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me, Reed. It's always a pleasure talking with you.
We'll see.
We'll see. Let me try.
Yeah.
So the idea that AI social infrastructure comes from the observation that AI systems have melted into all the digital infrastructures we already use to navigate social life, whether that is our email, whether that is inside of our phone, whether that is trying to get a job, whether that is just doing your job in a professional environment. And so we don't necessarily see that mediating function of AI. It's hidden from us, but it directs us in certain ways. And it also asks of us that we make ourselves legible to AI systems in certain ways. I can give you an example from my immediate environment at a university. We can say, for example, there's one graduate who isn't really on LinkedIn and doesn't really have filled out their profile. And then there's another one who has a very carefully curated LinkedIn profile and has time to actually also do that and maintain that and engage with the other people on LinkedIn. And so these two people are differently legible to the predictive or AI logics within the LinkedIn platform, which means that recruiters see them differently who use predictive
Hmm.
systems
Hmm.
on LinkedIn. And therefore, these people have different kinds of access to resources. So we
Hmm.
think about how AI mediates sometimes, and sometimes we don't. And it has this sort of social organizing function.
Okay, so I have a couple of things to say. So first of all, really the metaphor of it's melting into our lives, something like that, because then it makes it feel like it's really permeated, like any crack gets filled in by melted AI. So I like the melting metaphor. I guess your point, though, our lives, though, are mediated by lots of stuff. Before it was AI, you could say it's the internet, or we could say even before the internet, it's mediated by job ads and newspapers to take the recruiter stuff still or something, employment. We had to apply to jobs and it's mediated by the hiring managers. So I don't know. So I guess I want to say, why do I care? So I suppose I say, look, our lives are always in some sense mediated. We're causally interacted with all sorts of things all the time, whether it's digital stuff like AI and the internet, or whether it's analog stuff like newspapers and telephone books. Why does it matter? Why do I care so much if I say, okay, fine, yeah, AI has melted its way into our lives in various ways. So what? There's always stuff melted into our lives in various ways. What's so special about this?
So I think what's special about this or new about this is that other than previous ways of prediction or machine prediction, we now learn about the world mediated through the predictive logics that are inside of AI, whether that is search, whether that is writing something, whether that is interpersonally interacting with somebody, even in the most
Mm-hmm.
intimate setting. So we can say that there is an epistemological shift happening. I call it the prediction paradigm. The prediction paradigm sort of sits between, it directs who we connect with, how we connect with them. And we're always, as I said earlier, suspicious of this predictive logic. We don't quite know what's going on inside, but we behave in different ways based on the suspicion of how prediction actually happens. So you can think of that like the algorithm that you want to signal to on Amazon. So you're actually shown products that you want to buy, or
Sure.
you do the same on social media to get content that is desirable to you. But what is happening when this is occurring in a decidedly social context or in a context in which social organization happens? For example, gig work. Let's take a Lyft or Uber driver where prediction actually assigns driving
Mm-hmm.
jobs. So what is happening there is a constant tracking, a constant classifying, and a constant scoring. And so Uber and Lyft drivers, for example, are aware of that in certain ways and try to accommodate the predictive
Mm-hmm.
logic of AI, and it affects their behavior and the sort of social organization of their own work. And that is the prediction paradigm.
Okay, so I want to get clearer on it in a way. So when you first started talking about it, I was hearing something like recommendation algorithms. And I thought, okay, but that's probably too narrow. And then you seemed to broaden it in some way to talking about Uber and Lyft drivers, because it's making predictions, about how good they're going to be, whether they're the right fit for the potential customers. Is that the idea?
So we don't actually know what goes into these
Yeah.
predictive logics within these gig work platforms. Suspicions could be that it is customer rating, for example, how fast people arrive at the where the customer actually is, what kind of car they have, what kind of safety rating, and so forth. But again, we don't know how actually the social classification that happens feeds into the prediction and then actually assigns the
Yeah.
job.
Can you help me think about how this contrasts with what we had before? I guess I think, all right, before you had AI doing it, you had, and we still have in some cases, the dispatcher at the car service who's managing the fleet of cars. We had, like I said earlier, hire managers. We still have hire managers making predictions about who's going to be good for the job. So they read a resume, they predict who's plausibly a good candidate, that we should interview them. They interview them. Then they make a prediction about among the people that we interviewed, who's plausibly going to be a good employee. We make predictions about who's going to default on their mortgage. We make predictions about who would be a good business partner. We make predictions, blah 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 blah. Like we're constantly making predictions. There's tons of human-made predictions, and I imagine that our lives have always been shaped by the predictions that people make. Oh, my boss is not going to like it if I do this, so I better change my behavior accordingly. So and just like that's supposed to be analogous to the Uber driver who says, the algorithm is not going to like this, so I'm going to behave accordingly. So it might be that the shift has gone from being predictions made by humans to increasingly predictions made by AI or non-AI algorithms. But so what? Is it the thing that's doing the predicting that matters, or is it the fact that predictions are being made that mattered? Or both?
It's a mix of both. Let me answer your sort of first question first. I think the difference is that prediction now occurs at scale, and you no longer have perhaps a one-on-one situation where, say, a loan officer and somebody who's applying for a mortgage interact, and there's tables that inform that sort of manual prediction, and probably tacit knowledge, we would call it, what kind of person is this, and there are bias problems within that as well. But the
Sure.
point about AI is that it is a scaling technology or a scaling instrument, similar
Yeah.
to how other infrastructures are scaling instruments. And so you no longer have a one-on-one relationship. You have one to tens of thousands of people relationship that is very dynamic, but that it is fundamentally based on the idea of prediction.
Mhm.
Because autonomous or semi-autonomous action in that relationship occurs based on prediction as well. And so that is the new thing, is the scale thing. The other new thing is that it is taken, or it has escaped these domains in which we are familiar with prediction. You mentioned them. For example, hiring, we're all familiar.
All the things.
All the things. And it is now part of things like information retrieval and search, or
Mhm.
writing, or creative work, or socially organizing a team, for example. And so that is the new thing, that the logics of prediction are part of how we organize work, family life, hobbies, and everything in between.
Yeah. Is part of the thought that there are areas in which it's one thing to move from many humans making many different predictions to one or a handful of algorithms making lots of predictions. And so then you've got this concern about what does it mean to us and how we live if the set of things making the predictions drastically reduces, and then we wind up with a kind of homogeneity in the kinds of predictions that are made. That's one kind of question. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it's bad. Maybe it's good. I'm not sure. I guess I want to hear more on that potentially. And then the second thing, though, it sounds like you're saying we're also moving to a point where there's swaths of life that were not prediction laden and are becoming prediction laden. And presumably, I think you think that's to the worse for those swaths.
Yes, I wouldn't necessarily front load a "this is all bad" message
Yeah.
at all. What
Yeah.
I'm trying to say in my book is that there are many instances in which very well-structured data, environments, and problems lend themselves to highly powered predictions that we can operate now with the advanced AI systems that we have. Drug discovery is one, for
Yeah.
example. right?
Like protein folding, yeah.
Protein folding, all these kinds of things. However, as a sociologist, I'm interested in set cultural shifts that are occurring. And if you were to ask me about a concern, one concern would be that we are what I call now socially committed to causality, where there is only correlation. So causality means we know the relationship between A and B, we know the direction of the relationship. Correlation means we only know that there is some form of relationship. And so ultimately, all AI systems are still based on correlation. And the idea of there being a degree of uncertainty actually is fundamental to the idea of democracy, because we actually don't want to know who will win the election, for example. We don't want to know what will happen in the future because we want people to be on an equal footing when it comes to running for office, for example. So the whole idea that there's one future that is predictable and that you only need the most powerful means of prediction, that is the term borrowed from Oxford economist Max Casey, then you are the center of the world. And that is what worries me, is this sort of cultural undertone that we're not really addressing right now.
Okay, so I want to hear more about the connection between the predictions and the democracy. So how does that go? I imagine there's always been predictions about who's going to win the race, whether it's a political race or not. So now we have AI making the prediction instead. Okay. If it's not the case that people making predictions about who's going to win the next election doesn't undermine democracy. Sorry, if it's not the case that it does undermine democracy, why would it be the case that AI making similar kinds of predictions is a threat to democracy?
I think the issue that I'm trying to flag is a little deeper. Of course, part of democracy is calculating who you think win.
Sure.
But the embedding of sort of an efficiency logic, reducing instances where individual humans must decide, where we need deliberation, that's the eroding thing. If you think you no longer need to bring your students into one room to discuss a topic or a paper because they can learn remotely with an AI system, this sort of culture of deliberation, this acceptance of uncertainty, and this acceptance of individual responsibility quietly goes away. That is my worry. I will also
go ahead.
I will also say that just technically AI is based on the idea that the past is a good predictor of the future. You can only crunch data that you have already collected. You can't crunch data of the future, of course. And so just like philosophically, that often means finding old solutions to old problems rather than finding entirely new ones, and working more towards the idea that there's malleability, that we can plan for surprise, and that we can actually center people a little bit more is what I'm worried gets lost.
Okay, so keep on with the election thing. Is the idea that, I wonder if this is the sort of frustration that one feels when you hear the pundits talking about, is what they said good? Is what the candidate said in the speech or the debate good based on how it will sway voters, as opposed to, is it good based on something like the merits of what they actually said? Not will it cause the vote to swing this way or that way, but rather is what they're saying fully supported by the evidence or well supported by the evidence? Is it justified? Does it have huge gaps that I at least get frustrated with forget about what they say is going to affect the people that are voting. What about, are they right? Or they're dead wrong? They're lying. They are failing to consider 17 other possibilities or whatever it is. I want to hear about the substance of what they said as opposed to the causal effects of it. Is this the kind of thing? So am I misreading you? That part of the problem is that if we just how should I put this? If we try to make more and more parts of life predictable or make predictions, we'll spend more and more of our time having the kinds of conversations that are about the horse race as opposed to the substance.
That is absolutely right. And I think the explosion of prediction markets is the best illustration of that.
Go on, yeah.
That is a cultural shift, right? Like that, the idea that we can predict anything, we can bet on anything, and the idea of prediction being valuable, more valuable than contingency or surprise, has created this prediction market environment that we find ourselves in, that we constantly get really interesting reports on just today on somebody using classified information on the Maduro capture in a prediction market bet. And
But they're not but they're not making the sort of the value claim, at least not explicitly, that knowing is better than something like, curiosity and surprise and wonder and what. They're just trying to make a buck, right? Or in some cases, millions of bucks. But it's not that kind of value judgment. It's just, oh, here's a place where we can make some money, no?
absolutely. But what then happens is, can you gobble up data to make your bet better? How can
Yeah.
you make your wager producing more powerful? How can you actually predict the future? And everything falls around that. It is extremely alluring. It is extremely attractive. And it was confined a little bit to spaces in which it had been around for a longer time, but now it's everywhere. For example, we are engaged in AI systems at universities that predict the performance of our students, and that becomes part of advising, right? And so what is not in there is the idea that a student could come around the next semester for whatever reason.
Sure.
And so I'm worried about a lethargy that sets in, right? What can we do about anything if everything is directed into sort of one way through this AI's infrastructure? You see, the problem isn't the AI itself. The AI can be a magnificent and powerful instrument. The issue is that we give up on important ideas such as the deliberation, democracy, and surprise, just by way of AI being absolutely everywhere and taking on this role of an infrastructure.
So I guess the point then is something like earlier, the first sort of bit of this conversation, it felt like we were talking about individuals being, roughly speaking, you didn't use this word, but I'm going to use it, maybe it's too strong. Individuals being controlled by virtue of living in an AI predictable world. I'm going to change my behavior because the AI is going to make this prediction about me, and so I need to change how I behave, whether I'm an Uber or Lyft driver, or whether I'm making purchases on Amazon or whatever. I'm gonna change my behavior. I'm gonna watch my behavior in a certain way because essentially, again, I don't think you used this word, but maybe you did. We're being surveilled by the algorithms, and so that makes us surveillance changes your behavior. So that was one bucket of part of the conversation. But now the thing that I'm hearing is something that's slightly different. You've said this, I guess you're talking about the culture more generally, and you said apathy or laziness, but it sounds to me like the appropriate word, given what you said, is something like helplessness, because it sounds like what you're concerned with. And you tell me I'm wrong, but it sounds like what you're concerned with is that the more that we melt predictions into the world, the more it looks like that's just the way that the world is. It's always going to be, when in fact, it's up to us. And if you think that the predictions are typically probably right, then doing anything contrary to that prediction just feels like fighting the windmills. There's just no point.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're putting your finger onto a very important point, which brings me back to the idea of AI as infrastructure. So infrastructures are enormous, they're large, they're centrally controlled, right? You just spoke about control. And they're also not necessarily changeable easily or hackable, I call it in the book. You cannot easily change the grid, right?
Yep.
Or how you get water. You have to actually come up with processes and procedures to meaningfully do that. And so we haven't begun to think about what that means for AI. AI is not easily hackable. We cannot easily reveal what's going on, and we cannot influence, let alone democratically influence, this infrastructure. And of course, what we're seeing right now in the context of the data center debate is voters getting upset about this, and data centers, part of the sort of hard infrastructure of AI, becoming topics of debate and actually becoming part of races on local and state levels. And so I think we're going to see more of a shift where we have to think about what does it mean to think about AI as an infrastructure, and an infrastructure that is part of how we govern everything else in society, which could be through
Well, so
monopolies.
okay, but if I take the analogy, or as an analogy, just listing another member of the class of things that are social infrastructures, you take water, electricity, roads, those feel like a single thing. And so what do we do about managing water for society? What do we do about building roadways for society? What do we do about keeping electricity safe and accessible to everyone? And it feels to me like there's a single coherent thing that, more or less, that we're trying to get our hands around. Whereas AI doesn't seem like that. It seems, yes, there are these underlying algorithms, but the places where where AI and other algorithms have their impact on humanity is in the particular applications that they're used in. So it's not like there's, if you like, a reservoir of AI that we're going to distribute and use in various ways. It's more, I don't know what the appropriate metaphor is, but it doesn't feel like social infrastructure because AI doesn't feel to me like the single coherent thing. It feels to me like a set of algorithms, or really a set of products or something along those lines. Tens of thousands of products that get used in various ways. And when you take together the set of all AI products, you get the kinds of things that you're talking about. Or you potentially get the kind of things you're talking about. The kind of prediction has melted its way into social life. And now we're all controlled by it. We view the future as inevitable by virtue of these predictions that are made. But if you want to deal with the sort of, we're not going to govern the set of all AI products, are we? I don't, in the way that we govern water and roads and electricity. So I don't, there feels to me like there's a disconnect, but tell me I'm wrong.
You're wrong,
Great.
because we actually already encounter AI as one discrete unit through the AI industry and through the massive investments that are made into model makers, your Anthropic, your OpenAI, and into data centers. And so my idea would be to actually combine those and consider them monopolistic entities and not actually go down the antitrust route first and foremost, but say, okay, we acknowledge the infrastructural character here. We are going to think about how we can regulate this combined entity as perhaps a monopoly, and actually think about them both as public utility and as a common carrier. And this is something I talk about in the book. I try to move away a little bit from the very polarized discourse around AI, in which it's either all bad and we need to resist, or it's all good, and the boomer-doomer polarization that we find everywhere, and think about the utility of AI and quite literally take that as a jumping off point for thinking about how we can perhaps combine these monopolistically governed entities, which then means that the government plays a role in price setting, for example. You can think about how that happens on the GPU level, and how in return for that stability, public research or publicly funded research can happen, for example, at local universities in collaboration with industry. We have precedent from the past, of course, through AT&T and the Bell Labs. That's a very well-known example. So we can think about what that concretely means for AI. So when I say you're wrong, I say you open your every daily and you see just today Google saying they're going to invest $40 billion into Anthropic. That's a market. That is one industry. And through circular deal making, there's an intimate connection between model makers and data centers or cloud providers. That is one space that we can meaningfully intervene in, even though on a product level, on an organization or institution level or one-on-one level, these are different kinds of products, but they infrastructurally are related in this way that I think we can leverage.
Yeah. Okay, so let me ask you two questions, one of which, I don't know if it's fair, because I don't know how well telecommunications. I don't know anything about telecommunications. I know very little about telecommunications. And telecommunications, AT&T, as you just mentioned, Verizon, I don't know, whatever. There's lots of them. T-Mobile, Orange, Vodafone. Anyway, those are corporations that are not owned by the government. They certainly provide social infrastructure, but there's lots of competition amongst them, of course. And I don't even know what my question is, but something like, should we regard AI as something like akin to the kinds of phone lines and internet lines that telecommunications companies own, and we should treat them as such, or as opposed to like how water is managed? I actually don't know anything about how water is managed either, so I don't even know how big the contrast is. But so I don't know if you could shed any light on what it means for there to be social infrastructure that's privately owned or owned by corporations. That would be great, and how that compares to AI. And then second question is, so what do you want to see the government do? What kinds of regulations are we talking about here? What kinds of laws are we talking about here such that it would treat Anthropic and OpenAI and Google as purveyors of something that's roughly analogous to, I'm going to guess, the telecommunications industry?
Yeah, so I'm gonna front this by saying I'm not a legal scholar, but I did dig into common carrier and public utility scholarship and legislation for thinking concretely through these questions.
Yeah.
As part of wrapping my head around the AI bubble, and we can talk about that as well
Sure.
if you want. So the idea of public utility is not that the government owns the infrastructure. The idea is that a private entity owns the infrastructure and makes a deal with the government, that there is stability in pricing and there is planability, if you will, for consumers, and the monopolistic position is preserved. It is not challenged through antitrust, for example. In return, in the context of AT&T, there was money that was given to the industry research lab, and the sort of social contract was that Bell Labs would continually invest into foundational research and research that is pushing technological innovation forward, right? So it's an interesting public-private relationship that can happen here. Now, what we have today is that a ton of, I would even say, the majority of AI research on the model maker side of things already happens in privately owned and corporate research labs, right? And so we can ask, are we leaving the public behind here? Are we leaving a public interest in science behind? Because let's not forget, let's go back to AI as utility. What is it useful for? It is absolutely useful for scientific inquiry. And you can't open a Nature journal issue without looking at least 5 papers that use AI as an instrument to push forward science. So I think that it's not about one or the other, it's thinking concretely about that. And we can take cue from telecommunications. Also, broadband was classified as a public utility as far as I understand. So I think there's a lot we can learn there as well. The other thing I think that we need to bear in mind, and folks in DC are talking about this already, is the worry of the AI bubble through aforementioned circular deal making, where model makers, chip makers, and cloud companies invest enormous amounts of money into each other based on debt. And the fear that in absence of clear-cut business models, we are going to experience something akin to the dot-com bubble. And so I think there is an economic imperative to think about AI infrastructure as well.
Okay, so one question is, if there's such a bubble, then isn't it premature to talk about regulating this thing in the way that we might regulate telecommunications? Because if telecommunications weren't as successful as they were, if Alexander Graham Bell makes a phone and everyone shrugs at it, we wouldn't say, oh, okay. If people got excited about Bell's invention for 6 months or a couple of years, and then they thought, okay, this actually isn't so useful, we wouldn't say, oh my God, we better get regulation for it. It's only because it's been so successful that we think, or that we plausibly think, we got to regulate this stuff, or we got to have some kind of partnership, government-private partnership in order to make this viable, blah, blah, blah. So if there's still a threat of a bubble, doesn't that speak, or doesn't that tell against introducing any kind of regulations that seem to presuppose the great success of AI? That's the first question. Whatever, I'll stop there, then I got another one. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think, Reed, what you're getting at is like the usual, oh, won't regulation kill innovation kind of thing.
No, it's not that. It's that I would think that if something is social infrastructure, it's because it's become so successful that it's just something like society can't live without it at this point. It's baked in, but there's so much socioeconomically resting upon it that if it were to go away, that'd be a huge problem. Or if it were leveraged by just a handful of people or held captive by a handful of people and the rest of humanity is blackmailed because they need that stuff so badly. So we better introduce some regulations, blah, 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 blah. But that presupposes that the thing is so important. But that doesn't seem to me... And okay, so if that's the situation with AI, fine, that's one thing. But if it is a situation with AI, it doesn't seem to me that it sits comfortably next to the claim that we're in a bubble and it's going to burst and AI is not all it's cracked up to be. Because if it's not all it's cracked up to be, it's not rising to the level of success, it seems, that would require regulation.
So I think what you're maybe conflating is commercial success with the infrastructural role and benefits of
Okay.
an AI, right? Like it's enormously useful in search, or when there's specialized AI that helps me go find papers for very niche research areas very quickly so I can get a
Sure.
snapshot of what's going on. That's not necessarily a business model. Running these systems is extremely expensive, right? It's great, it's useful, it advances society, it is essential, it is infrastructural, but they're not making money, right? And they won't for a good amount of time. And so I think we need to draw a distinction here. And the question is if something is so essential, including broadband,
Yeah.
should we think about it as a free market business, or should we think about it as an infrastructure that we need to make sure everybody has access to so
Yeah.
that innovation can happen and we can make products that then make money?
Yeah. One thing that you seem to be saying here, I think, is something like, look, AI is freaking amazing in a lot of respects, and we should support it. And one way to support it is by way of government supporting it in various ways, because government sees its at least potential for tremendous utility to society at large. But of course, in exchange for that government helping out, it becomes the kind of thing that's not just controlled by the corporation, because if the government's going to dump resources into it on behalf of society, then government, as a representative of society, also has to have some degree of control over it, like making sure prices don't go bananas.
Absolutely. And it can then also make demands that pertain to potential of discrimination,
Sure.
safety, right? If we had this sort of, I would call it like a pro-AI, pro-innovation take here, we could mandate disclosure. We could come up with recourse in the case of proven AI discrimination. We could put in place mechanisms by which the public has more oversight over when and where AI is used meaningfully in science and technology development, in which we just have a broader participation in this thing that is, I do believe, transformational, but that is off the rails right now. Funnily enough, similar to how railroads were experiencing a complete explosion when they originally were being built here in the United States. That was a massive bubble that burst, and then they were actually classified as common carriers, and sort of regulation happens. There's a ton we can learn from railroads, actually, and it's a very similar situation right now, I think.
Suppose I'm one of these companies, leader of one of these companies, or maybe I'm just a bit more on the conservative side of things. I let's say I lean anti-regulation. I don't, in fact, but let's suppose I did. Suppose I said, hey, listen, first of all, this is me speaking as Dario Amodi or something like that, someone, the co-founder of Anthropic. I appreciate your concern, government, about us not making enough money, but thanks but no thanks. We don't want your money. We don't want your resources. We don't want your help. We're good. Thank you very much. I would imagine that we don't want to force them to take. I don't even know that we could. That's one thing. And relatedly, why? Suppose I'm like playing the skeptic. I'm not even playing the skeptic. I don't have a view on this, is the truth. Suppose I said something like, why regard this as I don't yet understand why we should regard this as infrastructure. Yeah, it's all over the place. I imagine though I can think of lots of examples of things that permeate our social lives that we don't think is social infrastructure. I wonder if you think social media is infrastructure, by the way. But anyway, probably lots of stuff permeates our lives in more ways than we can count, but we wouldn't count it as social infrastructure, and we wouldn't want government having a hand in what it does and doesn't do, or something along those lines. I don't know. Is religion a social infrastructure? I don't know. Anyways, maybe it's because I don't know what the hell social infrastructure is, or what counts as social infrastructure, and I wonder if some things just are not social infrastructure, even though they permeate society. That's one kind of question. And then a related kind of question, is it the case that for all those things that actually do qualify social infrastructure, does that mean that, if you like, they automatically get signed up for regulation?
No, to the last. My notion of social infrastructure is borrowed from the wonderful and extremely smart sociologist Eric Kleinenberg, who pointed to actually describe how social cohesion and sort of social glue can be strengthened through places that infrastructurally work for people to connect, especially libraries, but also public parks and so forth. So places in which society finds itself and connects and solidifies, if you will.
So Instagram and church both count.
It could be. Yes, it could be. Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm not saying it wouldn't. My inversion of that is that AI is social infrastructure because it administers, manages, and directs social relationships. It's bureaucratic in that sense. And so just to your earlier point, the question, could social media be considered social infrastructure? I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not a social media researcher. I have wonderful people in my department around me who are. But I think maybe if we had that conversation at the time, it might have changed things earlier. What I'm trying to disagree with here is the idea, let's just see how it pans out.
Sure.
And then we'll come in. I think the sums and the scale and the significance are too large, again, akin to railroads in this case.
And so not all things that are social infrastructure need to be regulated, right?
Correct.
And so how do I know that AI, I guess the definition of social infrastructure is the three things you just said, manages, directs, what was it?
That was my inversion of Eric's.
Yeah.
No,
it's fine.
Eric's notion, correct. So like AI is social infrastructure because it mediates social relationships. It is focused on that, and it administers, it manages, and it directs.
Yeah. So then, okay, let's suppose you get brought in by the government, probably not this one, but suppose you get brought in by the government, and so look, what do you think we should do here? What are the kinds of things, what are the kinds of regulations or laws that we should really seriously consider at this point?
I think the very first move I would make is to establish that idea that the prediction paradigm is a risk for how we have agreed to live with one another, and that cultural risk is the big problem, and the actual harms are sort of effects of that. The second thing I would argue for is ensuring that we have more public oversight over the development and benefits of AI innovation, and can ensure that it is actually used for things that will be enormously helpful and beneficial in 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 years. Me using AI to write a great speech for my nephew's birth is not groundbreaking. It's nice, but it's not groundbreaking, right? I could do it myself. It's not moving the needle, but AI can move the needle. And I think that we have an obligation to try and do that for all of society, and to leverage that to establish mitigation for harms that can occur also.
Okay. Well, Mona, this has been great. Thank you so much for all that. The book is Predicted: How AI is Restructuring Social Life. Mona, thank you so much for coming on. This has been great stuff.
Thank you so much for having me. Always a blast. Thank you, Reed.
Thanks everyone for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I want to thank a few people who make this all possible. Delano Alexander, he's my producer. He does such an amazing job on everything that he touches. Garrett Lang is the sound engineer. That's honestly, he's too good for me. Athmia Jairam has joined us recently. He's helping us find the best guests to bring onto this podcast. And Ashley Wasilenko helps us organize all this, get people on the schedule, get people's bios, headshots, and really keeps the train on the track. So thanks, guys. Really appreciate all the hard work you do.